The story of Afghanistan is in so many ways a very tragic one. It is a nation that has suffered invasion, external pressure and internal upheaval since before the time of Alexander the Great. Its people have endured more than their share of hardships. In fact, for many Afghans, all that has changed in the last 1,000 years are the weapons which have been used against so many of them. And among all the people that make up the Afghan nation, probably no other ethnic group has been subjected to the discrimination and violence suffered by the Shia Hazara community. They have been deprived of their traditional lands, they've been massacred, sold as slaves, and been denied access to the same services and opportunities available to the majority of the population. There is much about the history of Afghanistan, and in particular the history and identity of the Hazara, that remains unrevealed and unknown to this day. This is the story of their journey across the centuries. Historically, Afghanistan has been the link between Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. And so it's a nation made up of many different ethnic groups, the result of innumerable invasions and migrations. Within its current borders, there are at least a dozen major ethnic groups, including Turkmen, Hazara, Pashtun, Tajik, and Uzbek. The Pashtun nationality has always been the most dominant, and the royal families of the country were always Pashtun. Today, they represent about 50% of the total population. Islam was brought to Afghanistan during the 8th and 9th centuries by the Arabs. Prior to that, the nation had been ruled by various Persian, Greek, and Central Asian empires. Following a subsequent breakdown in Arab rule, semi-independent states began to form. The Mongolian invasions of the 13th century came as massive black clouds driven by divine winds over a desolate landscape. Local dynasties and states were overwhelmed and crushed by the mighty armies led by the legendary Genghis Khan and his successors. These ruthless conquerors were to remain in control of part or all of the country until the 1500s, despite much resistance and internal strife. Following the collapse of Mongol rule, Afghanistan found itself in a situation much like today, caught in the grip of great powers. Armies marched to and fro, devastating the land and murdering the people, laying siege to city after city and destroying whatever had been left by the invading armies. It was not until 1747 that Afghanistan was able to free itself. This was the year that Nadir Shah, an empire builder from Persia, died and left a vacuum in Central Asia. Ahmed Shah, a former Afghan bodyguard, took up his post. Ahmed Shah was a Pashtun, and his Pashtun clan was to rule Afghanistan in one form or another for the next 200 years. Ahmed Shah was able to unify the different Afghan tribes and went on to conquer considerable parts of what are today eastern Iran, Pakistan, northern India, and Uzbekistan. His successors, though, proved unable to hold his vast empire together, and within 50 years much of it had been seized by rival regional powers. Within the country there were numerous bloody civil wars for the throne, and for many Afghans it meant little that their lives were now being uprooted and destroyed by their own people as opposed to foreign invaders. At the beginning of the 19th century, Afghanistan's internal affairs became dramatically aggravated by the increasing intervention of two new foreign powers, the British Empire and Tsarist Russia. These two great powers were engaged in a race for Afghanistan. Their seizures of land, the overthrow of indigenous nations, and their reckless interference in the affairs of the remaining independent states in the region became known as the Great Game. For Afghans, the consequences were devastating. The arrival of European imperialism into the region simply accelerated and made more deadly the wars, poverty, and destruction that had already racked the region. The Pashtun kings reigned over the country until 1973, when a republic was declared. But this new political regime also failed to meet the fundamental needs and aspirations of the people. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 marked the beginning of 25 years of suffering and continual strife that transformed the country into a desolate land once again. The rich cultural heritage of this country also began to disappear gradually, as did the Afghan people's hopes of recovering some sort of life, a decent income, and a reasonably secure existence. These are the mountainous central highlands of Afghanistan, the Hazara Jat, or the land of the Hazara. And just like these imposing landscapes, the history of the Hazara people is shrouded in mystery. The Hazara's gentle Mongolian features set them apart from other Afghans. They speak an archaic form of Persian, with words borrowed from Mongol and Turkish. According to popular belief, the Hazara are descendants of the Mongol hordes that invaded this region in the 13th century. It's thought that when Genghis Khan retreated from the lands of the ancient Bactria, he left behind 1,000 of his men in the mountains of the Hazara Jat. These people later came to be known as Hazara, in reference to the Persian word Hezar, which means 1,000. But there has been much debate in academic circles about this legend.
تا آنجا که تاریخ رو میته هزارها دست کم پیش از 2000 سال به این طرف، شاید 2500 سال به این طرف دمیجا سکناگزین بودن و به اندازه هر قوم دیگه و هر ملیت دیگه حق دارن و میتونن سوابق خود نشان بدن و مدعی شدن که به هر حال از ساکنان اصلی از این سرزمین هستن. اما این که از کجا آمدن در این رابطه فرضیه های زیاد وجود داره، نه فقط در مورد هزارها بلکه در مورد سایر اقوام هم هست، در مورد پشتون هم هست، در مورد تاجیک هم هست، در مورد ازبک. اینا به هر حال متاسفانه پاری از نجات پرستای افسانه را دامن زدن، ترویج کردن که هزارها خیلی متأخر هستن.
The early inhabitants of these regions were Buddhists, but when Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, arrived here with his companions, some Hazara tribes converted to Shia Islam during their stay and over a long period of time after him. In those days, being a Shiite simply meant declaring allegiance to Ali and his family. But over the centuries, the various Muslim communities and clans became more radicalized as they began stressing the importance of tradition and identity in order to underline the differences between Shia and Sunni Islam, which has always been the dominant force in the Islamic world. Until their land was captured by the Pashtuns in the 1880s, the Hazara placed women on an equal footing with men. The social position of women was such that they were consulted on family decisions and might even ride to war with the men. This, of course, is not at all what one encounters in rural Afghan society today. Over the centuries, successive invasions forced the Hazara to retreat deeper into the mountainous regions of the Hazara Jat. In these inhospitable lands, they managed just about to scrape a living. They cultivated the land and made utensils in wood and metal. They became expert ironmongers and manufactured swords and shields, but they also produced spades for working the land. They remained independent of non-Hazara ethnic control until 1892. But the Afghan ruler Abdul Rahman put an end to all of that. Abdul Rahman came to power in 1880 as the Emir of Kabul. Initially, his pressure against the Hazara was political and financial. But in the face of their resistance, he resorted to oppression and violence, and this led to uprisings by the local populations. Abdul Rahman defeated the Hazara tribes one by one. He occupied the entire Hazara Jat and incorporated it into the Afghan state in 1893. He replaced local leaders with Pashtun administrators, who set up a system of exorbitant taxes. His troops assaulted Hazara women, organized the pillaging of homes, the enslavement of children. By sending Sunni clerics to every village in Hazara Jat, Abdul Rahman forced the Shiite Hazara to attend Sunni mosques and to abandon Shiism. Hazara resistance to Abdul Rahman's integration was ruthlessly crushed, and an edict was issued granting rights over the fertile pasture lands in the region to Pashtun nomad tribes, the Kochis, who had helped the emir to conquer the area. For 90 years the Kochis exercised these rights. When they themselves became landlords, they built the mud fortresses, now in ruins, that still dot the Hazara Jat countryside. Meanwhile, Abdul Rahman partitioned their lands into 3 provinces to destroy the Hazara's sense of unity and independence. He described the Shiites as infidels. This is a translation of a letter he addressed to Sunni clerics and preachers in 1892.
Let it be known to all respectable mullahs and preachers authorized to say prayers in mosques that the infidels, namely the Shiites, are also living in Afghanistan. At the instigation of those devils, their imams, they thought it fit to abuse the caliphs. If their infidelity is due to their ignorance, they ought to grasp the true facts of a true religion. But if they persist in their false faith, they should all be put to death and their property confiscated in accordance with the divine doctrine and the precepts of the Prophet.
This was the beginning of a century of bloody persecution.
ساختارهای زندگی را دوجه از بین بردن، چون فکر کنیم گفتم هیچ حدود 62% از مردم هزاره پس از این حمله مهاجر شدن. در این زمان فروش هزاره ها رسما رواج داشت. دولت از فروش برده های هزاره مالیه میگیره و این خودش موجب این شد که تعداد مهاجرت کنند که اگر برگشتن هم برگشتن، اما یا دوباره مجبور شدن زندگی رو و حتی تاریخ خود از نو آغاز کنند. یک گسستگی آمد، یک تفریقی تاریخی آمد و وضع کنونی مردم هزاره دقیقا مولود و محصول از همین فروپاشی. میشه این به زیر عنوان فروپاشی یاد کرد. یک جامعه انسانی از هم پاشید.
The kings who succeeded Abdul Rahman did not subject the Hazara to such cruelty. At one point during his reign, Habibullah Khan, the elder son of Abdul Rahman, addressed a letter to the Hazara acknowledging the atrocities committed by his father against them. In this letter, which has been kept by a Hazara family through generations, he asks them to return to the lands that have been confiscated and illegally granted to the Kochis, the very people who had helped his father in brutally suppressing them. But the Hazaras still felt like strangers in their own lands, although their feuds with warlords in the region were in no way comparable to the ethnic massacres of the past. They lived a precarious existence and yet gradually began building a new economy on a small scale. But their terrible ordeal would not be over yet. (1994). The country is ruled by warring Mujahideen factions, squabbling over the pitiful remains of a country they themselves freed from 10 years of Soviet occupation. It was at about this time that the world first became aware of the Taliban, when they were appointed by Islamabad to protect a convoy trying to open up a trade route between Pakistan and Central Asia. They proved effective bodyguards, driving off other Mujahideen groups who attacked and looted the convoy. They went on to take the city of Kandahar, beginning a remarkable advance that led to their capture of the capital, Kabul, in September 1996. Many Afghans, weary of conflict and anarchy, were relieved to see corrupt and often brutal warlords replaced by the devout Taliban, who had some success in eliminating corruption, restoring peace, and allowing trade to resume. But unfortunately for the Afghan people, their rule marked the beginning of one of the darkest and most tragic periods of recent Afghan history. The Taliban, under the direction of the shadowy and secretive Mullah Muhammad Omar, instituted a reign of terror through the highly strict interpretation of Islamic law, or Sharia. For the Hazara, history was repeating itself, and a new tragic chapter would echo the horror of the reign of King Abdul Rahman. In a religious edict, which word for word is practically the same as the fatwa issued by Abdul Rahman, the Taliban authorities issued their instructions.
Shias are infidels. There is no doubt in their infidelity. Boycotting Shias is the duty of every devotee of the Prophet. We demand that Shias should be declared a non-Muslim minority on the basis of their infidel beliefs, and their entry into Mecca and Medina should be banned.
After having been forced out of their lands, the Hazara sought refuge in the rugged mountainous areas of northern Afghanistan. There they hoped to find land that would allow them to live a peaceful existence and to practice their religious faith freely. Mazar-e-Sharif, the capital of Balkh province, owes its name to the mausoleum in which Imam Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin, is supposedly buried. According to popular belief, a 12th century local mullah had a dream in which Ali was secretly buried in a locality near the ancient city of Balkh. After some investigations, the then Sultan ordered a mosque to be built on the designated spot, but this was later destroyed. Today, the mausoleum remains an inevitable place of pilgrimage for all Muslims, Shia and Sunni. Even at the height of fighting between rival Mujahideen factions, when the whole country was torn apart, Mazar-e-Sharif remained an island of peace for the Hazara, the Tajiks and the Uzbeks who lived there. But in 1997, when the Taliban were preparing to take the city, the local population took drastic action. Over 2,000 Taliban were killed in the ensuing violence. Things didn't end there, though. The Taliban wanted revenge. In a concerted attack in August 1998, they savagely slaughtered the mostly Hazara population during a 6-day frenzy that cost the lives of thousands of civilians.
اونا که آمده یک تعداد مردم اینا را راه داد. چاپاچارسون راه داد، در منطقه مزار یک دم گرفت لغت کرد آمد. که آمد اونا چیزی که وی که پای داشت رفت لکو بالا شد. وی که بی پای بود غریب بیچاره بود، اینجا که مانا گرفت از یخنش گرفت کشتی. یک تعدادش برد بندی کرد و یک تعداد دیگه‌اش برد این در قندار بود. 3 سال پادشاهی کرد دیگه تمام این منطقه را گرفت یک دم. مذهبش میگفت مذهب دیگه به غیر از سنی شیعه باید نباشه این منطقه. کلگی یک مذهب باشه. این مقصدش هم میگه.
ما در دکان بودیم، آمد ما را زمین یخنیم گرفت کش کرد، ما را پرسان که از آرسیم ما را پایین کشید، سری داکسان بالا کرد و یک دوسیه چند خنداق هم زدک ما را موبس برد. تا موبس این دمیج موبس برد تا نماز دیگر موبس بدیم، بعد نماز دیگر ما را در کانتینر قبا کرد در شبرغان بردک.
ما را میگفتن شما حزب افغانی نیستیم. ما به خاطر که صاحب خانه را بیرونی آمده کشیده نمیتونه ایستادگی میکردیم که نمیدونیم خانه از ماست، ما افغانیستیم و تا یک نفر هم از افغانیستیم ایستادگی میکردیم. به این خاطر چند دفعه قبلا که آمدیم میگفتن 10,000 نفر کشته شده. خب معلوم نیست 10,000 بود یا کم بود، مقصد کلا کشته شدن، تعداد کمش فرار کردن. به این خاطر می بغضشان زیاد بودن، به این خاطر با ما بدرفتاری میکردن.
Other than the massacres they carried out, the Taliban also obliterated everything that made up the identity of the Hazara. Among other symbols, they destroyed the mausoleum built in the memory of Abdul Ali Mazari. This political figure was considered by the Hazara as their spiritual father. He founded the Hezb el-Wahdat, or Unity Party, and was the first political leader to speak up for and on behalf of a unified Hazara and Shiite political party, putting their case to the UN and the international community. Mazari's faithful secretary and bodyguard, who was also killed, is buried alongside him. The Hazara have begun to rebuild what the Taliban took away from them, but the way they live today and their current poverty bear the scars of past violence and testify to their sacrifices. Using religious heresy as a pretext, the Taliban brutally punished all those they called parasites, foreigners in their own lands. They spared no one. They showed no pity, not even towards the most vulnerable and the weakest. Yet, as often happens throughout history, there were a courageous few who dared. Among them, this young woman. The memories of those terrible times are still very much alive.
بعد از ظهر بود و من خانه بودم همراه خواهرها و برادرای کوچکتر از خود. پدرم برادرایم در شهر بودن مصروف کار خود. سر صدا بلند شد. فهمیدیم که وضعیت به هم خورده. باید هر که در گوشی از خدا بگیره وقتی رزی که احتمال راکت و مشک چیزی بود. من خواهر و برادرای کوچک در زیر زمینی بردم. خودم دم در کوچه منتظر بودم تا برادرم یا پدرم بیاین. حالت نارامی به من دست داد. وقتی دروازه کوچه را باز کردم دیدم تعداد زیاد از مردم، اکثریتش از ملیت هزاره، از منطقه شمال طرف ما به نام نور خدا نهم شهر مزار است برآمده بودن. اطفال، زنان، پیر، جوان، کس در دستش دوشک، بالشت، کس در دستش خوراک کباب طرف شهر می آمدن. می گفتن ما روزی شریف میریم، زیارت حضرت علی میریم، اونجا می خوایم تر از اینجا اونجا باشه. در بین این مردم ما 2 طفل کوچک دیدم، 2 پسر بچه که سن یکش 4 سال بود، سن دیگهشم 7 تا 8 سال. ای دو تا طفل خرد گریه میکرد. امی مردمی که امرایش بود سن یک از خانمایی که چادری داشت صدا میکرد خاله. فکر کردم شاید مادرش خواهرش کسی باشه. برش دشنام داد، گفت از ما دور شو. نمیخواستی طفل امرایش بره. متاثر شدم چون طفل خرده بود، کودک بود، نیازمندی داشت، ضرورتش بود که امون لحظه کسی باید رو حمایه میکرد. صدا کردم برش، گفتم بیا طرف ما. اردیشونه در دهلیز خانه بردم. بعد از او گفتم که در زیر زمینی برین چون وضعیت خوب نیست. صدا بلندتر شد. مادرم گفت که بدم رای خود نگاه نکنم طفل را. از ملیت ازاره هستن میگه میفهمید که طالبا اگر بیاین اولین بار با می مردم هر برخورده که میکنم با می نمیکنم. برشون گفتم فرق نمیکنه. قرار باشه اگر ما بمیریم، اگر خداوند خواسته باشه می دو طفل خرد باعث میشه شاید ما از بین بریم. اما اگر زنده هم بانیم شاید می دو طفل خرد، حالا اینا چی گناه دارن؟ وقت صبح شد برش نان دادم. یک دو ساعت گذشت گفت نه ما را خانه ببرین، مادرم جگر خون میشه. یک برادرم از خودم خورد است. هر دو طفل گرفت همراه خود برد تا یک فاصله برده بودش تا نزدیک خانه. بعد از دیگه ندانستم بچه ها کجا شدن، مادرشان آمد یا نامد ندانستم. اما مثل یک خاطره همیشه در زندگی من به یاد مانده و رسی بسیار زیاد تاثیرم کرد.
Now that Mazar-e-Sharif had fallen, there was one last obstacle to complete Taliban rule over the whole of Afghanistan and to establish their supremacy. In the rugged mountains of Hazarajat, each passing season brings hardship for the villagers who live here. The endless succession of high mountain peaks obscures the possibility of more welcoming lands beyond. Yet, when least expected, the road suddenly opens up and gives way to a 2,000-year-old site, a treasure trove of history and architecture. Bamiyan. Situated on the ancient Silk Route, it was an important crossroads between East and West, where all the trade between China and the Middle East passed. This town is the cultural centre of the Hazara. It was the site of several Buddhist and Hindu monasteries and a thriving centre for religion, philosophy and art. Monks at the monasteries lived as hermits in small caves carved into the side of the Bamiyan cliffs.